I'm just going to say it. Adding more flaws to your protagonist is not going to fix them. Making them snarkier also won't fix them. Giving them a more tragic backstory, a quirky habit, or a sarcastic inner monologue, none of that is going to fix them. And if you've been spinning your wheels trying all of those things or similar things and still getting feedback from readers saying the character just feels kind of boring and kind of flat, then this video is for you. Because in this video, I'm going to give you the exact 3-part framework that builds a character that readers feel, not just like or understand, but really, truly resonate with. I'm going to show you what each piece is, what it does inside your story, and give you some tactical starting points so you can begin applying this to your story today, okay? And I'm going to tell you right now, this isn't the just try harder advice. This isn't just start writing and you'll figure it out, or here's a 47-question questionnaire about your character, go fill this out. This is the foundation that craft books don't teach you. And it's the single thing that separates emotionally flat characters from characters that readers just cannot get enough of. Now, before I get into the framework, I want to call out a few things that you might be experiencing right now, because I want you to know that it isn't just you. I hear versions of this from tons of authors all the time that I talk to. These authors are working hard to get their stories written. They're committed. They're in the trenches doing this, the ins and outs of it every single day, and yet they're still hitting these walls. So drop a comment and let me know which one of these hits home with you right now. Number 1, your characters are technically correct, meaning they have backstory, they have story goals, they have clearly defined descriptions, but something is still off. Something is still missing and you can't put your finger on what it is. Or maybe, number 2, your emotional scenes just aren't landing the way that you want them to. The death, the betrayal, the confession, whatever it is, you've written it and rewritten it 6 times, but when you reread it to yourself, it still feels a little bit flat. And readers say, oh yeah, that was pretty sad, but they just don't seem like emotionally devastated. Number 3, and this is very, very common, you don't fully trust your character, meaning you second guess every reaction, every decision they make, every line of dialogue. It feels like you're guessing and you're not sure that what you're putting into the story for them is realistic or not. And that's because you don't really know who this character is down to their core. Number 4, your character arc feels kind of forced. So the character change happens because the plot requirements or because that's just what you want to happen at the end, but it doesn't really feel like the character earned it. And you know that, you're aware of that. It doesn't feel quite right, but you're also not sure how to fix it. Let me know which one of these you're experiencing the most in the comments right now, because I genuinely want to know what you're struggling with. And you have to understand that every single one of these problems tracks back to the missing foundation that we're talking about today. So you have to understand that the things that most authors do to fix these problems doesn't actually solve them. And it's not that you've been doing anything wrong per se. It's more that you've been doing the right thing that addresses the symptoms rather than the underlying cause, right? So the first reason that these common fixes don't work is that backstory is not the same thing as a character wound. Most craft advice, and honestly, most, character worksheets that you find on Pinterest or wherever, will tell you to dig into your character's backstory. What happened to them? What was their childhood like? Some of them get into really ridiculous details that are just unnecessary. What color was the character's toothbrush in 5th grade? Now, I'm not saying that backstory is useless. Some of those things can be very helpful, especially if they are relevant to your story. But backstory is just a series of events. Even the trauma they went through is still just an event. Somebody can go through a trauma, and if it doesn't give them a limiting belief, if it doesn't break them in some way, then it's still not a wound. It's just something they experienced. The character wound is what broke inside of them because of that trauma. It is the thing that gives rise to a limiting belief that is going to affect them their entire lives until they shift it. Okay, so the wound is the psychological conclusion that they drew based on that trauma. So something like, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, I'm not lovable, something like that. Remember that 2 characters can share a trauma in their backstory, but their wounds can be completely different, or one might come out with a wound and the other might not. And that makes all the difference in how they move forward in life. When you have only the backstory and not the wound, that is not enough to drive their behavior and affect their decision making. All you have then is some interesting history. And yes, it's interesting, but that doesn't create emotional resonance with your readers. The second reason a lot of these fixes don't work is that surface level traits are not emotional depth. What I mean is quirks, scars, habits, that sarcasm that comes out in some characters. These are fun. They're kind of great to write, okay, but they're surface levels expressions of a character. So if we go back to our house analogy, they are the paint on the wall, they are not the foundation. And when you pile on more and more of these surface traits trying to make a character feel compelling, number one, it's actually very detrimental because too many traits become too complex for your reader to really latch onto and get to know the character. But even more important, you're putting more and more and more coats of paint in many different colors on a house that doesn't have a foundation. There's literally nothing underneath it, and the reader can feel that. They can't always name it, but they can feel it. The character feels like a collection of attributes rather than a person. And that's what creates the whole, I understand them and I understand what's going on in the scene, but I'm just not feeling it kind of feedback that I know cuts you right to the bone. Okay, the third reason these kinds of fixes don't work is that more trauma without psychological resistance is not emotional depth, it's just pain. So it starts to feel gratuitous, as though you're just torturing your character for no reason. And I see this so often. An author gets the feedback that their character feels flat, so they decide that they're going to raise the stakes emotionally. Make that backstory darker. Add more suffering, more brutality, more horror. And the thinking is, if I make this heavier, readers will feel it more. But again, that's putting a band-aid on something without actually addressing the foundational cause. You need to help the reader feel the character's pain, not necessarily add more pain. Even the tiniest amount of emotional pain can carry an entire story if done right. So you don't need more pain, you just need to communicate it to the audience in a deeper way. Just adding more and more pain, more horror, more darkness, it'll weigh the reader down, but it doesn't give them catharsis. And that's because when you do that, you're not really giving the audience something to root for. Nobody likes a story where it's like pain, 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 the end. We need to see the character working through it. We need to see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And man, your readers will be there every single time to see that light come into view. This is the reason people love fiction. And of course, the fourth reason that often these fixes don't work, and this is the big one, is that most authors don't plan the transformation before they start writing. Most authors, and I was absolutely guilty of this in my early career, have a really vague sense that their character is going to grow or learn something or change in some way. And that's it. That's the whole plan, which means that the arc either gets figured out as you're going through the story or maybe not at all. And when you do either of those things, the change at the end, even though you have it, feels very sudden, like flipping a switch. It feels convenient and contrived. Your character's transformation, if you do it correctly, it should feel, even if they didn't realize it because you didn't state it outright, it should feel like the beginning of the book, the character was this way, and you were always headed toward that transformation. The entire story pointed to that moment in the climax when the character has to decide who they're going to be moving forward. It should feel so inevitable. And if you don't plan it in advance, or if you don't plan it at all and then just suddenly throw the change in there, then guess what? It feels like what we call deus ex machina, which means it's too convenient. It comes out of left field, even if it's not. The transformation for your character needs to be planned before you start writing the story, not during and not after. And when it is, everything else, the plot events, the relationships between characters, all of their setbacks and trials and stumbling blocks, suddenly have a reason to exist. It's like suddenly you gain such clarity about the functionality of every single part of your story, and every scene starts pulling its weight. Okay, here it is. So here's what actually works. And I want to walk you through all three of these pieces so that you have a clear picture of what you're building toward. The first piece is the character wound. The wound is the specific psychological process that happened to your character, usually earlier in life, but it can just be any time before your story actually begins, that fundamentally changed in some way how they see themselves and the world around them. It's not the event itself, although it's not a bad idea to plan that event and think about what it was. It's really more the fracture that that event created in the character's psyche. It's the place in them that is still broken at the beginning of your story. And here's why this matters so much. The wound is the engine of every single thing your character does. Everything they want, everything they fear, everything they avoid, everything they tolerate, and the choices they make throughout the story. When you have nailed this down, and when I say nailed it down, I mean very specifically, not vaguely, your character's behavior and their choices become psychological inevitabilities. Readers feel like they know this person, not because you told them the backstory or showed it to them in flashback, but because they can feel that psychological wound operating underneath every scene, underneath every choice your character makes. They can feel, try that again. And this is what creates emotional resonance. The raw emotional wound, the readers can feel that because we all have limiting beliefs. We all have raw emotional wounds. And so when they recognize that and feel it in your characters, they say, oh, I felt this character so hard. And that's what makes them latch on. That's what makes them need to know what's going to happen to this character and how it's going to turn out. It is what hooks them into your story and makes them get 100,000% behind your character, rooting for them, waiting for that ending to see if they're going to overcome. The wound itself creates a story. This is a story that the character tells themselves about who they are, what they deserve, and what's possible for them, and what they may have to do to stay safe. And by that, I mean psychologically safe, emotionally safe. So that story they tell themselves becomes a limiting belief. And the limiting belief is the invisible lens through which your character interprets every single thing that happens to them in the plot. And this is the piece that makes your character feel internally consistent. When you know the limiting belief, know what choices they're going to make because of it, even the infuriating, self-destructive ones, actually, especially those, because from inside the character's emotional reality, those choices just make sense based on what they believe. They're protecting themselves. They're operating from the only worldview that they know. And that is so deeply human. That is so deeply flawed. And that is what your readers will latch onto. Not perfection, not logic, not snarkiness, but instead the very human, very recognizable behavior of acting from a broken belief about yourself. The limiting belief is also what creates the real internal conflict in your story. Not just external plot tensions, but the emotional yearning of a character who wants something, but simultaneously believes they cannot have it, or don't deserve it, or can't be trusted with it. That tension is what makes every scene feel charged. That tension is what keeps readers turning pages late into the night. And of course, the third piece is transformation. The transformation is the specific internal shift your character makes over the course of the story, from the limiting belief to something that is freer and truer. So this isn't just a lesson they learn. This isn't just a, here's the moral of the story. Okay, this is emotional and psychological movement. If you're telling a story that has a positive arc, then chances are they're going to let go of this belief in some way, transcend to believe something better, again, truer or freer about themselves. If you're writing a negative arc, more like a tragedy or possibly a horror story, then maybe they don't let go of the belief and it becomes their doom. Or they just end up in a cycle of repeating the same belief and never transcending. And here's the thing I cannot stress enough. You need to know what this transformation is before you write your first scene, because the transformation is the whole reason the story exists. Remember Vogler's definition. A story is a metaphor for a journey that leads your character to a change or a transformation. Everything else is fun. Have all the best time that you can writing your great worlds and your great scenes and your great plot twists, but that needs to be layered on top of the foundation, which is the internal transformation. Everything in the plot, every obstacle, every character relationship, every world building element exists to push your character either toward or away from that transformation. When you have it planned, your story has direction and feels very cohesive. Even your subplots and your B story will have direction. And when you don't plan it correctly, you end up with a character who changes because the plot ended, not because they actually went through a psychological or emotional transformation. I'm going to give you a guess which one is going to be more powerful to your readers. Let's look at Harry Potter as an example. The traumatic event of his past was the loss of his parents, but the wound is his profound feeling of not belonging anywhere. His limiting belief for much of the series is that love is something that can be taken from you, that the people you love most are put in danger by your existence. Think about the way that that informed the plot in so many of the Harry Potter books. People like Ron, Hermione, and Ginny being put in danger, and Harry felt like he had to save them. Mentors like Sirius and Lupin and Dumbledore being lost at some point, and the way that that affected Harry. It felt like a reinforcement of this limiting belief he had had his entire life. His transformation was learning that love is exactly what protects, not what destroys, and then choosing to walk to his death because of it. That transformation is what makes the end of the Deathly Hallows so devastating, so cathartic, and so deeply earned. The plot did not create that. J.K. Rowling built her story from the inside out. Okay, so I told you that I would give you a couple of places to start, and here's what I want you to actually do with this. Tip number 1, find the wound by asking, what does my character believe about themselves that isn't true? Okay, so this is not what happened to them, not what is their biggest fear. What do they believe about themselves that isn't true? That's the wound talking. That's where their limiting belief lives. For a lot of characters, this might sound like, I'm not lovable unless I do X, Y, and Z. I'm a burden. I only matter when I'm useful. I might destroy the people that I love. Whatever it is for your character, write it down and write it in their voice. Not as a narrator describing them, but as a first-person statement. Because that first-person belief is what's driving every choice they make. Once you have that, ask yourself, is every major decision that my character makes in the story consistent with someone who believes that? If the answer is no, if they are doing things that someone with that belief wouldn't actually do, there's where your inconsistency is coming from, and that's what needs to get fixed. Tactical tip number 2, plan your transformation as 1 to 2 sentences before you write another word. So maybe start with, for sentence 1, at the start of my story, my character believes, and insert your limiting belief. For sentence 2, say, by the end of my story, my character has moved toward believing, and insert a belief that is truer or freer than the limiting belief. That's it, just those 2 sentences. No, that's not the entire arc mapped out, but just having those 2 points, the beginning and the end, you can see the difference and how they're going to shift. And then you can weigh and measure every scene against that and ask if you're heading in the right direction. Always ask, does what's happening in the scene, is it pushing my character toward or away from their limiting belief? And is this scene doing any internal work for my character arc? Because if it's not, it may be doing a lot of plot work that is not going to land emotionally with your reader. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid, right? Now, inside my program, the Emotional Storyteller's Intensive, we go into way more depth about this. We go into a step-by-step plan for exactly how to do your internal arc, how to show the shift across the story, exactly what to put in every scene, all of that. But for now, what I want you to take away from this video is that you are not bad at writing characters, and your characters are not flat because they don't have enough backstory or because you're just not creative enough. I hope that you see by now that it's not your fault. You just haven't been given the right tools to create these characters in a way that will resonate with readers. There's a lot of plot books out there that can teach you about plot structure, about scene construction, even about dialogue, but very few of them teach the internal arc properly. You'll probably hear me say this a lot, but fiction writing is psychology. You need to understand this if you want to really write books that are going to resonate with readers. And it is that psychological or emotional layer that makes readers feel like they know and love someone who is fictional. Think about the magic that that takes. And it's very, very doable. It's just not very well taught in our industry. I mean, sure, we kind of vaguely gesture at it like, make sure your character has a clear inner arc, but does anyone actually tell you how to do that? No. But the Emotional Storyteller Intensive gives you a step-by-step process to make sure that gets in there, to make sure your story is landing with readers, and that is what creates fans that will come back to your writing again and again because they know that you know how to create characters that make them feel something. Okay, and this framework, the step-by-step process, is how you create those fans, right? It's not a formula, it's not a checklist, it's a foundation. It's a load-bearing structure that everything else, your plot, your world building, all the events of your story are built on top of. So have you ever heard authors talk about how characters come alive and start making their own decisions and talking back to the author and that sort of things? This is how that happens. Once you have this locked in, once you know what's broken in your characters and how that will drive their decision making, that's when they become three-dimensional. That's when they jump off the page. That's when they start making decisions themselves because based on their psychology, there is no other decision that they would make. The scenes clarify, the character voice clarifies, and the choices stop feeling like guesses. You'll stop rewriting the same scene over and over again because you'll finally know what that scene needs to do emotionally and how to do that. And that is the freedom on the other side of this. It will take you from guessing and rewriting and feeling frustrated because your characters feel flat to being able to sit down and write any story, any characters that you want anytime and knowing exactly how to make them emotional so the readers will fall in love with them. I want you to hear this one more time clearly before you go. You are not stuck because you can't do this. You're stuck because no one handed you the right starting point. But now you have it. You're not behind. You don't need to scrap what you've already written. You don't need to start over. You need to do this foundational work, find the wound, name the limiting belief, and plan the transformation, and then go back and reread what you have with fresh eyes. You'll start to see exactly where the emotional engine is firing and where it's kind of dead. And that should be really exciting to you because now you're going to know exactly what you need to fix and why. So drop me a comment below. Tell me if you already have any form of character wound, limiting belief, or transformation for your character. Even if it's very vague, even if it's just a sentence or two, I would love to know where you're starting from. Now, what we've talked about in the last two videos are the reasons why readers are not latching onto your characters. In the next video, I'm going to show you some mistakes you might be making that are naturally flattening your characters, making them feel very two-dimensional on the page. If you avoid those mistakes, then your readers are going to be able to latch onto your characters even more powerfully. So go check out this video right here to find out what those mistakes are. You can fix them today and automatically make your characters more 3D and more realistic and more as if they're jumping off the page. I'll see you there.